Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Most people don't realize how isolated you get driving trucks for a living. It was late October 2022, and I'd been hauling freight across the Midwest for about 8 years at that point. The job suited me fine. Decent pay, lots of time alone with my thoughts, and I got to see parts of the country most folks never do. I was 43, divorced, living in a small apartment outside Columbus, Ohio. That particular week had been routine runs, nothing special, until dispatch called me Thursday afternoon with a last-minute delivery. Some agricultural equipment heading out to a farm about 2 hours from Des Moines needed to arrive that same night. The pay was double the usual rate because of the rush, and honestly, I needed the extra cash with the holidays coming up. Should have been my first warning sign. But money has a way of making you ignore your instincts. The address they gave me led to this property way out past civilization, where the paved roads turned to gravel and then to dirt. My GPS kept recalculating, trying to figure out where the hell I was supposed to go. Around 9:30 that night, I finally found the place. A massive wooden gate with Donovan Farm painted on a crooked sign that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s. The client, a guy named Mr. Donovan, had called me 3 times already to make sure I was still coming. His voice had this weird urgency to it, kept saying they absolutely needed the equipment tonight, couldn't wait until morning. When I pulled through that gate, my headlights swept across empty fields on both sides, dead corn stalks standing like soldiers in neat rows. The main house sat about a quarter-mile back from the road, completely dark except for one window glowing yellow on the second floor. But the delivery instructions said to bring everything to the barn, another half-mile past the house, deeper into the property. The barn was this enormous red structure, probably built in the 40s or 50s, with those old-style sliding doors that must have been 20 feet tall. Mr. Donovan was already waiting outside when I pulled up, standing under a single floodlight that barely pushed back the darkness around us. He was maybe 60, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt that hung loose on his skinny frame. What struck me most were his eyes. They kept darting around, never staying on me for more than a second before checking the darkness behind the barn, then the truck, then back to the shadows. He walked up before I even got out of the cab, talking fast about how grateful he was that I made it, how important this delivery was for their operation. The way he said operation stuck with me. Not farm, not business. Operation. He kept wringing his hands while he talked, and I noticed dirt caked under his fingernails, the kind that gets so deep it becomes part of your skin. I backed the trailer up to the barn doors like he asked, and that's when things started getting weird. Usually, clients have their own people to help unload, especially for heavy equipment. But Mr. Donovan insisted it was just him and me. Said his workers had gone home for the day, but he couldn't wait until morning to get this stuff unloaded. The cargo was 3 large crates of what the manifest listed as agricultural processing equipment, each one probably weighing around 800 pounds. No way 2 people could move those without proper equipment. When I mentioned this, he quickly said he had a forklift inside the barn. We just needed to open the crates first and carry the smaller components in piece by piece. That didn't make any sense to me. Why would you break down equipment before moving it to where you're going to assemble it? But he was already pulling out a crowbar, heading toward the first crate, so I grabbed my work gloves and followed him. The overtime pay was too good to start asking too many questions. We got the first crate open, and inside were definitely machine parts, steel frames, conveyor components, some kind of grinding mechanism. Nothing unusual there, Mr. Donovan grabbed one end of a frame piece, motioning for me to take the other. The barn doors were already open, just a black rectangle waiting for us. As we carried that first piece toward the entrance, he started talking again, his voice echoing weird in the night air. He was going on about how they were expanding their operation, how they needed more processing capacity, how business was booming. But everything about the place screamed the opposite. No fresh tire tracks except mine. No lights in any of the outbuildings. No signs anyone had worked this land in months. We stepped through those barn doors, and immediately the smell hit me. It was this mix of old hay, motor oil, and something else underneath, something sharp and metallic that made me breathe through my mouth. The only light came from a single bulb hanging from a beam about 30 feet in, leaving most of the barn in complete darkness. That's when I heard it. A slight shuffling sound from somewhere deeper in the barn. Not loud, but definitely there, like boots on concrete trying to be quiet. I stopped walking, still holding my end of the frame. Mr. Donovan immediately started talking louder, almost frantically, about where we should put the equipment, pointing toward the darkness with his free hand. But I was focused on letting my eyes adjust. And that's when I saw them. Shadows that weren't quite right, human-shaped forms standing perfectly still against the far wall. At first I thought maybe they were just equipment or hay bales, but then one of them shifted slightly. Just a small movement, like someone adjusting their weight from one foot to the other. There were at least 4 of them that I could make out, maybe more further back. They were just standing there in the dark, waiting. Mr. Donovan was still talking, his voice getting higher, more desperate, saying we should go further in, that the forklift was in the back. We just needed to walk past the old stalls to get to it. Every instinct I'd developed in 20 years of adult life was screaming at me to get out of there. I set down my end of the frame, nice and calm, and told Mr. Donovan I needed to check something in my truck real quick. His whole face changed then. The nervous energy turned into something harder, meaner. He said we were almost done, just needed to get the equipment inside, but his hand moved to his pocket, and I could see the outline of something there. The shadows in the back started moving forward, slow and deliberate, spreading out to block any path deeper into the barn. One of them knocked over something metal. It clanged against the concrete floor and echoed through the space. Mr. Donovan dropped his end of the frame with a crash and took a step toward me, saying I couldn't leave yet, that we had a deal. His voice had completely changed, no more nervous farmer act. It was cold, controlled, like he'd done this before and knew exactly how it was supposed to go. I didn't run. Running would have triggered whatever they had planned. Instead, I backed up steady and smooth, keeping my eyes on Mr. Donovan while tracking the shadows in my peripheral vision. Told him I had a tire pressure warning light. Needed to check it before the trailer shifted and damaged his equipment. Professional concern, you know. He hesitated for just a second, probably trying to figure out if I was playing along or making an escape. That hesitation was all I needed. I kept backing up, out through those barn doors, my boots crunching on the gravel. The shadows inside were moving faster now, and I could hear voices, low and urgent. Mr. Donovan followed me out, still trying to convince me to come back in, saying his nephews just wanted to help with the unloading, that's all. Nephews. Right. Nephews who hide in the dark and wait for truckers to walk into the back of barns. When I got to my cab door, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard through my jacket. His other hand was pulling something from his pocket, and I didn't wait to see what it was. I yanked my arm free and shoved him back hard enough that he stumbled and fell against the trailer. Then I was in the cab, slamming the door and hitting the locks in one motion. Mr. Donovan was back on his feet immediately, pounding on my door, yelling that I couldn't leave with his equipment. Through the side mirror, I could see 3 men had come out of the barn, all of them built like they spent their days throwing hay bales, and they were jogging toward the truck. I fired up the engine, and that beautiful diesel roar never sounded so good. Mr. Donovan jumped onto my running board trying to pull the door handle, his face pressed against the window. I could see his teeth, yellow and crooked, as he shouted threats about what would happen if I left. The 3 men were almost at the truck now, and one of them was carrying what looked like a crowbar. I dropped it into gear and started rolling forward, slow at first. Mr. Donovan held on for maybe 10 feet before he had to let go or get pulled under the wheels. The smart thing would have been to just drive straight out, but I needed to unhook that trailer. No way I was leaving them with $800,000 worth of equipment to maybe fence or use as bait for the next driver. I pulled forward about 50 yards, jumped out with my pin puller, and had that 5th wheel uncoupled in record time. The men were running toward me now, actually running, and I could hear Mr. Donovan shouting instructions to them. Something about the truck, don't let him leave with the truck. That's when it clicked. They didn't want the cargo at all. They wanted my rig. Probably planned to knock me out or worse in that barn, take the truck, and leave me and the empty trailer to rot on this property. I jumped back in the cab just as the first guy reached me, his crowbar swinging toward my windshield. The glass spiderwebbed but held as I gunned it, leaving them all in a cloud of dust and diesel exhaust. In my mirrors, I could see them standing there in the headlight beams from the abandoned trailer. Mr. Donovan still yelling, waving his arms like a madman. I drove straight through that wooden gate without slowing down, pieces of it flying everywhere, and didn't stop until I hit the main highway. Then I pulled into the first well-lit truck stop I found and called 911. The sheriff's deputy who showed up took my statement, looked at the damaged windshield and said he'd check it out. But his expression told me everything. This wasn't his first call about something weird happening out on those back roads. He asked me if I could identify any of the men besides Mr. Donovan, and I gave him what details I could remember. He wrote it all down, said they'd investigate, but warned me that by the time they got out there, the place would probably be cleaned up, looking like a normal farm again. These people knew how to play the game, he said. They'd have some story ready about a disagreement over payment, maybe even file a complaint against me for stealing their equipment. The deputy suggested I call my dispatcher, report everything to my company, and maybe avoid deliveries to isolated farms for a while. The next morning, my dispatcher called me, mad as hell, but not at me. Turns out the shipping company that contracted the delivery didn't exist. The paperwork was fake. The payment authorization was from a stolen credit card, and the phone number Mr. Donovan had been calling from was a burner. The whole thing was a setup from the start. But here's what really got to me. When I started asking around at truck stops, talking to other drivers, I heard stories. Similar situations, always at night. Always isolated farms or warehouses. Always urgent deliveries with premium pay. Most drivers who took those jobs and actually went through with going into the buildings were reported as missing, their trucks found abandoned states away, stripped clean. The drivers themselves? Never found. The FBI apparently had a task force on it, but these operations moved around. Different states, different names, always one step ahead. I was lucky. Lucky I noticed those shadows. Lucky I trusted my gut. Lucky I got out when I did. Now I stick to daytime deliveries, established companies only, and if something pays too good to be true, I remember that night at the Donovan farm and pass on the job. Some money just isn't worth it. I need to tell someone about what happened to me last Wednesday night on Highway 50, because I'm still trying to process it myself. I'm a long-haul trucker, been driving 18-wheelers for about 12 years now, mostly running freight between Nevada and Colorado. The name's Martin, and I usually pride myself on being pretty level-headed. You have to be when you're hauling 60,000 pounds of cargo through mountain passes and desert stretches. That particular night, I was carrying a load of electronics from Reno to Denver. Nothing too valuable, but enough to make me cautious. I'd left Reno around 6 in the evening, planning to drive through the night since traffic would be lighter, and I could make better time. My wife Joanna was expecting me home by Friday afternoon, and I wanted to grab some sleep at the depot before heading to our place in Aurora. The weather was clear. Just a regular November evening with temperatures dropping, but no snow in the forecast. Highway 50 through Nevada is called the loneliest road in America, for good reason. You can drive for hours without seeing another soul, just endless stretches of sagebrush and distant mountains. I actually prefer it that way most times. Gives me space to think, listen to podcasts, maybe call Joanna when I hit the spots with decent cell coverage. Around 9:30 that night, I was about 40 miles east of Austin, Nevada, when I first noticed the headlights in my mirrors. Now, seeing another truck on Highway 50 isn't unusual. Plenty of us use it as an alternative to I-80. But something about this one caught my attention right away. It was a Peterbilt, Looked like a 579 model from what I could tell, painted solid black with no company logos, no dot numbers visible, nothing. The trailer was one of those refrigerated units, also black, which struck me as odd because most reefer units are white or silver to reflect heat. The whole setup looked expensive. Custom maybe, but completely anonymous. I figured it was probably some owner-operator who liked to keep things low-key, though in 12 years of driving, I'd never seen a completely unmarked commercial rig. At first, I didn't think much of it. The guy was maintaining a decent following distance, maybe 300 feet back, which is respectful spacing for night driving. But after about 20 minutes, I started getting this uncomfortable feeling in my gut. See, when you're driving long haul, you develop a rhythm, a pattern to your speed. Sometimes you'll push 70 on the straightaways, drop to 65 on the grades, maybe slow to 55 around the sharper curves. Most truckers behind you will either match your average speed and gradually fall back, or they'll find their own pace and eventually pass. But this black rig, it was matching me, move for move, like we were connected by an invisible cable. When I'd ease up to 72, I'd watch those headlights in my mirror slowly creep up to maintain that same 300-foot gap. When I'd test it by dropping to 60, those lights would fade back, keeping the distance perfect. After 30 minutes of this, I knew something wasn't right. I tried to get a look at the driver when we passed under the occasional streetlight near the small towns, but the cab windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see anything inside. The thing that really started bothering me was how quiet my CB radio had gotten. Usually, even on Highway 50, you'll catch some chatter, maybe someone complaining about speed traps or warning about deer on the road. But ever since that black truck appeared, my CB had been dead silent except for static. I tried calling out a few times, standard stuff like, "Westbound, you got your ears on?" but got nothing back. Even tried switching channels, thinking maybe my radio was acting up, but every frequency was the same. Just that low, empty hiss. I grabbed my phone to call Joanna, let her know I was running on schedule, but I had no signal, which wasn't unusual for that stretch. Still, the combination of the silent CB and that truck maintaining perfect distance was making the hair on my neck prickle. About an hour into this strange dance, I decided to test something. There's a way station near Eastgate that's usually closed at night, but it has a wide pull-off area where truckers sometimes stop to check their loads or grab a quick nap. I put on my turn signal way early, giving plenty of warning, and started slowing down for the exit. Sure enough, those headlights behind me started blinking, left turn signal matching mine. My mouth went dry as I watched this happen. I kept slowing, dropped to about 40, then 35 as I approached the off-ramp. But at the last second, I canceled my signal and accelerated back onto the highway, pushing my rig harder than I usually would. The black truck followed my exact move. Canceled signal, smooth acceleration, right back to that 300-foot distance. That's when I knew for certain this wasn't coincidence or some driver who just happened to be going my way. This person was deliberately following me, had been for over 50 miles now. My mind started racing through possibilities, none of them good. Maybe someone knew what I was hauling. Electronics aren't drugs or guns, but a trailer full of laptops and tablets could be worth decent money to the right fence. Or maybe this was something else entirely, something worse. I'd heard stories at truck stops, drivers talking about rigs that would follow you until you stopped. Then bad things would happen. Hijackings where they'd beat you half to death and leave you in the desert. Some guys even claimed there were crews that would force you off the road in remote spots, make it look like you'd fallen asleep at the wheel. I'd always figured those were just trucker tales, stories that got bigger with each telling. But sitting there with that black rig glued to my bumper, those stories didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. The stretch of road ahead was particularly desolate, wouldn't see another town for 30 miles. And cell coverage was non-existent. I started doing the math in my head. I had about 3/4 of a tank, enough to make it to Ely without stopping, but that was still almost 2 hours away. The nearest rest stop was about 40 minutes ahead, one of those basic pull-offs with bathrooms and a couple of parking spots for semis. I'd stopped there before, remembered it being poorly lit with no security cameras, just a lonely spot in the middle of nowhere. No way was I pulling in there with this black rig on my tail. I kept checking my mirrors, hoping to see some identifying mark on the truck, maybe catch a glimpse of a license plate when we went around curves and the angle changed. But whoever was driving that thing knew what they were doing. Stayed perfectly centered in the lane, never gave me a different view. The only thing I could make out was a small red LED light on the dashboard, glowing like a little eye watching me. Even the marker lights on the trailer were dim, barely legal, just bright enough to avoid getting pulled over but not bright enough to illuminate any details. Then something happened that made my whole body tense up. We were coming up on a section where Highway 50 intersects with Route 376, and there's a small gas station there, one of those old mom-and-pop places that closes at 10 but leaves the lights on for the self-service pumps. As we approached, I saw another semi parked by the pumps, a white Freightliner with Anderson Logistics painted on the side. The driver was outside, looked like he was checking his tires with a flashlight. I started flashing my high beams frantically, hoping he'd look up, maybe see something was wrong. The guy did look up, shielded his eyes from my lights, and I saw him take a step toward the road like he was trying to figure out what my problem was. But as soon as we passed, I watched in my mirror as the black rig's high beams suddenly blazed to life, aimed directly at the other driver. The man stumbled backward, and I saw him drop his flashlight. Those high beams stayed on for maybe 5 seconds, then went dark again. When I looked back at the road, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so hard. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. I kept glancing between the road ahead and my mirrors, watching those headlights maintain their perfect distance. My shirt was soaked with sweat, even though I had the AC running. I tried the CB again, scanning through all 40 channels, but it was still dead. That's when I remembered something. My nephew had given me a dash cam last Christmas, one of those dual camera setups that records both front and rear. I'd installed it, but honestly forgot about it most of the time. The memory card could hold about 6 hours of footage before it started overwriting. I reached up and made sure the little red recording light was on, then adjusted my rearview mirror slightly to make sure it was catching the black rig. At least if something happened, there'd be evidence. The thought of if something happened made me want to vomit. I'd been in close calls before, tire blowouts, ice storms, even had a drunk driver sideswipe me once near Salt Lake City. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated, patient. Whoever was in that truck was waiting for something, and I had a sick feeling I knew what. Finally, I saw the sign for the Hickison rest area coming up, 2 miles. It wasn't much, just a pull-off with some picnic tables and basic facilities, but I remembered it had something important, a clear view of the road in both directions and enough space to turn around quickly if needed. More importantly, it was on a slight hill, which meant I'd have the high ground if things went bad. I know that sounds paranoid, but when you've got 70 miles of nothing in every direction, and someone's been stalking you for over an hour, paranoid starts feeling pretty rational. I made my decision quickly, no signal this time, just suddenly veered toward the exit at the last possible moment. The black rig's brakes locked up behind me. I heard the squeal even over my own engine, and for a second I thought it might jackknife trying to follow. But the driver recovered, wrestling that monster onto the exit ramp behind me. As I pulled into the rest area, my headlights swept across the empty parking area. No other vehicles, no witnesses, just me and whoever was about to follow me in. I positioned my truck strategically, nose pointed toward the exit, engine still running. Then I waited, watching in my mirrors as the black rig slowly rolled into the rest area and stopped about 50 feet behind me, engine idling with a low, menacing rumble. We sat there for what must have been 5 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Neither of us moved, neither shut off our engines. I could see the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat of the black rig, but the tinted windows still prevented me from making out any features. They just sat there, waiting, watching. I had my phone in my hand, praying for even 1 bar of signal, but got nothing. Then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. A second figure moving inside the cab, shifting from the sleeper berth to the passenger seat. There were two of them. My mind raced through my options. I couldn't outrun them. Their rig looked newer and probably had more horsepower. Fighting was out of the question. I'm 53 years old with a bad knee, and there were two of them. I kept my hand on the gear shift, ready to slam it into drive if either of them opened a door. The waiting was excruciating. I could hear my own heartbeat over the rumble of the engines. Then, suddenly, their CB crackled to life, not with words, but with this strange clicking sound, rhythmic, almost like Morse code, but not quite. Click, click, pause, click, 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 pause, click. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a countdown, or worse, a signal to someone else. That's when I saw the headlights approaching from the west, another vehicle coming fast. As it got closer, I realized it was a Nevada Highway Patrol cruiser. I'd never been so happy to see those lights in my life. I immediately started flashing my high beams and hit my air horn 3 times, the universal trucker signal for distress. The patrol car slowed, pulled into the rest area, and positioned itself between me and the black rig, those LED light bars illuminating everything in harsh blue and white. The officer got out, hand resting on his sidearm, and walked toward the black truck. I watched him knock on the driver's window, saw it roll down just a few inches. They talked for maybe 2 minutes, though I couldn't hear what was said. The officer walked around the rig, shining his flashlight on the sides, and I saw him pause at the back of the trailer, taking photos with his phone. Then he came over to me. Officer Colton, according to his name tag, mid-30s, looked dead serious. Asked if I was all right, if these guys had threatened me. I told him everything, the following, the synchronized movements, the intimidation at the gas station. He nodded, told me he'd gotten 2 other reports that week about a black semi following drivers on Highway 50, though I was the first one who'd actually stopped. He said the plates came back registered to a shell company that didn't really exist, and they'd been trying to catch these guys for weeks. Apparently, 3 drivers in the last month had been robbed after being followed, forced off the road in remote spots, beaten, cargo stolen. He told me to wait while he called for backup. Within 15 minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived, and the rest area looked like a crime scene with all the flashing lights. The officers surrounded the black rig, weapons drawn, ordering the occupants out. Through my mirrors, I watched 2 men exit the cab, hands raised. The driver was tall, maybe 6'4", wearing a gray hoodie and jeans, completely unremarkable except for a neck tattoo that looked like barbed wire. The passenger was shorter, stockier, had a shaved head and wore a leather jacket despite the cold. Both looked calm, almost amused, like this was just a minor inconvenience. The officers cuffed them, and one started searching the cab while another checked the trailer. That's when things got interesting. Officer Colton came back to me, told me they found something in the cab, a notebook with detailed logs of trucks they'd been following. License plates, cargo manifests somehow obtained illegally, driver names, home addresses, regular routes. My information was in there, down to my wife's name and our address in Aurora. They even had notes about when I usually stopped for fuel and which rest areas I preferred. The trailer was empty except for some tools that looked like they were meant for breaking into other trailers. Bolt cutters, crowbars, some kind of electronic device that Colton said was probably for disrupting trailer GPS units. These guys were professionals, had been doing this for who knows how long. The investigation took another 2 hours, with officers taking my statement, copying my dashcam footage, and documenting everything. They told me the 2 men were already wanted in connection with similar crimes in Utah and Arizona, part of a larger ring that targeted long-haul truckers carrying electronics and pharmaceuticals. The black rig was one of 3 they operated, all identical, all registered to fake companies. They'd follow a target for hours, learning their patterns, waiting for the perfect spot to strike. If I hadn't pulled into that rest area, if that patrol car hadn't shown up, they probably would have tried to run me off the road somewhere in the desert between there and Ely. Officer Colton gave me his card, said I'd need to testify eventually, but for now I was free to go. He offered to escort me to the county line, which I gratefully accepted. As I pulled out of that rest area, following the patrol car with my legs still shaking from adrenaline. I looked back one more time at the black rig, now surrounded by police tape and floodlights. The two men were already in separate patrol cars, and I never did learn their names. Didn't want to. I made it to Denver without further incident, hugged Joanna longer than usual when I got home, and took a week off before my next run. I still drive Highway 50 sometimes, it's part of my regular route, but now I've got a loaded Glock in my cab, completely legal with my concealed carry permit. And every time I see headlights appear in my mirror on those lonely stretches, my pulse quickens just a little, wondering if it's starting all over again. The rain had been hammering my windshield for the past 3 hours, and I was running on nothing but black coffee and whatever energy bars I'd grabbed at the last truck stop. I'd been hauling freight cross-country for about 12 years at that point, mostly electronics from warehouses in California heading east. That particular night in early September 2016, I was pushing through the mountains somewhere between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe, trying to make my delivery deadline in Elko. The CB radio kept crackling with static, and I remember thinking how the weather was getting worse by the minute. My wife Amy had called earlier, telling me our daughter Sophia had won her spelling bee at school, and I was feeling that familiar ache of missing another milestone. I'd promised them both I'd be home by the weekend, and I was determined to keep that promise, which meant pushing through despite the storm. The particular stretch of highway I was on had these brutal switchbacks that even experienced drivers hated, especially in weather like that. My rig was loaded heavy, about 78,000 pounds total, and the rain was making the asphalt slick as oil. I'd turned down my music and was gripping the wheel tight, keeping her steady at about 35 miles per hour through the curves. The headlights were cutting through sheets of rain, and visibility was maybe 30 feet at best. I kept checking my mirrors, making sure my trailer wasn't sliding, when I came around this particularly nasty bend that the locals apparently called Dead Man's Curve. The road curved sharply to the right, with a sheer rock wall on one side, and nothing but darkness and a steep drop on the other. That's when I saw them, 3 small figures standing right in the middle of my lane, not moving, just standing there in the downpour like they were waiting for something. Every instinct I had from years of driving kicked in at once. I yanked the wheel hard to the left while hitting the brakes, but not too hard. Jackknifing a fully loaded semi on a wet mountain road would have been a death sentence. The figures didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even react to my horn blaring or the massive 18-wheeler barreling toward them. They looked like kids, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing what appeared to be yellow raincoats that were way too bright, almost glowing in my headlights. Their faces were turned down, hidden under the hoods, and their arms hung straight at their sides in this unnatural way that made my chest tighten. The truck started sliding sideways, the trailer pushing me toward the guardrail, and I could hear the tires screaming against the wet pavement. I managed to thread the needle between those figures and the rock wall, missing them by inches, feeling the entire rig shudder as I fought to keep control. Once I cleared them, I immediately started looking for a place to pull over, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine. There was a small turnout about a quarter mile ahead, barely big enough for my rig, but I made it work. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, already dialing 911 while jumping out of the cab. The rain soaked through my jacket instantly, but I had to go back and check on those kids. The dispatcher answered, and I was practically shouting about children standing in the road during a storm, giving her the mile marker and everything. She said she'd send a patrol car immediately, and told me to stay in my vehicle for safety. But I was already jogging back along the shoulder, my flashlight beam cutting through the rain. When I reached the spot where I'd seen them, there was nothing. No kids, no raincoats, no sign anyone had been there at all. I searched both sides of the road, calling out, thinking maybe they'd run into the woods, but the only sound was rain hitting leaves and the distant rumble of thunder. The state trooper showed up about 20 minutes later, a younger guy named Officer Ramirez, who looked genuinely concerned when I explained what happened. He had me show him the exact spot, and we both searched the area with our flashlights while the rain kept coming down. He examined the skid marks my truck had left, took photos, and kept asking me detailed questions about what I'd seen. What really got me was when he asked me to describe the children's faces, and I realized I couldn't. Those hoods had hidden everything, and thinking back, they'd never looked up, not even when 18 wheels and 40 tons of metal came sliding toward them. Officer Ramirez got quiet for a moment, then asked me to follow him back to my truck. He pulled out his notepad and showed me a list of dates going back 2 years. Each entry was another driver reporting the same thing. Children in yellow raincoats, always in groups of 3, always at that exact curve, always disappearing without a trace. "We've had 4 accidents here in the last 18 months, he told me, his voice barely audible over the rain drumming on my cab's roof. Drivers swerving to avoid kids that aren't there when we arrive. 2 of them went through the guardrail." He pointed toward the edge where the mountain dropped away into blackness, and I felt my mouth go dry thinking about how close I'd come to joining that statistic. He explained that after the 3rd accident, they'd installed cameras at both ends of the curve, hoping to catch whatever was happening on video. The footage never showed any children, but it did catch something else about a month ago. A beat-up white van parked just around the blind side of the curve at 2 a.m., and someone dragging what looked like mannequins onto the road. By the time patrol units arrived, the van was gone, and so were the mannequins. Officer Ramirez pulled up a grainy photo on his phone showing 3 child-sized figures in yellow rain gear, positioned exactly where I'd seen them, except these were clearly artificial, with rigid limbs and faces that were just blank plastic heads under those hoods. The officer explained that they suspected it was either insurance fraud or something worse, cargo theft. Make a driver crash or stop suddenly, then while everyone's dealing with the accident or searching for injured kids, accomplices raid the trailer. He mentioned they'd found evidence of break-ins on 2 of the crashed trucks, though the drivers hadn't survived to confirm what was taken. The mannequins were weighted at the base, he said, designed to stand upright even in strong wind, and the yellow raincoats were made from some kind of reflective material that lit up like crazy under headlights. Whoever was doing this had put serious thought into the setup. They knew exactly where to place them for maximum effect, right at the sharpest point of the curve where drivers would have the least time to react and the most dangerous options for evasive maneuvers. Officer Ramirez asked me to check my trailer locks and seals, and sure enough, there were fresh scratches around the locking mechanism, like someone had been working on it with tools before something interrupted them. That's when we heard another truck coming up the mountain, the distant roar of a diesel engine fighting the grade. Officer Ramirez immediately got on his radio, calling for the nearest unit to stop all commercial traffic on this section until we could clear the scene. But the sound was getting closer fast, and we both knew the driver wouldn't see our vehicles until they came around that curve. The officer ran to his patrol car and hit every light he had. The whole area lit up blue and red like a carnival, reflecting off the rain and the rock walls. I grabbed my emergency flares from the cab and started running back toward the curve, igniting them as I went, throwing them onto the road to create a warning trail. We could hear the truck's jake brake engaging, that distinctive stuttering roar echoing off the mountains, which meant the driver had seen something and was trying to slow down. The truck came around the corner doing maybe 25, slow enough to stop when he saw us, and the driver, an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, rolled down her window looking shaken. "Did you see them?" she asked, before either of us could speak, her voice trembling. "The kids in the road, about 2 miles back, just standing there?" Officer Ramirez and I exchanged glances, and he quickly approached her truck while I stood guard watching the road. She explained that she'd seen 3 figures in yellow raincoats near a pull-off area down the mountain, but when she'd checked her mirrors after passing, they were gone. The officer immediately called for backup to search that location, suspecting the criminals were working multiple spots or had moved their operation after seeing the police lights. The woman, whose name was Gloria, said she'd been driving this route for 15 years and had heard stories about Dead Man's Curve, but never believed them until tonight. While we were talking, another call came through on Officer Ramirez's radio. A motorist had just reported seeing a white van speeding down the mountain on a service road that ran parallel to the highway, heading toward the valley. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Officer Ramirez told Gloria and me to continue to the next town and file official reports at the station, but I couldn't just leave without knowing more. I asked if I could follow him to wherever they were searching for that van, and surprisingly, he agreed, probably figuring a witness might be helpful if they caught anyone. We formed a small convoy, his patrol car leading, my rig following, and Gloria behind me, descending the mountain carefully while more police units raced past us heading up to secure the curve. About 10 minutes later, we reached an old way station that had been closed for years, and there it was, a white van with its engine still warm, abandoned behind the building. The back doors were open, revealing exactly what we'd feared. 3 child-sized mannequins dressed in yellow raincoats, along with several more in various outfits. There were also tools, rope, and what looked like electronic equipment for monitoring police scanners. But the people responsible were nowhere to be found, having apparently fled on foot into the surrounding forest. The police brought in dogs and searched all night, but the rain had washed away most of the scent trail. They did find footprints leading to a creek where the tracks disappeared, suggesting whoever it was knew exactly how to evade tracking. Inside the van, they discovered notebooks with detailed information about trucking routes, delivery schedules, and specific cargo manifests. These people had been studying their targets for months. What really made my skin prickle was finding my own company's logo on one of the papers, along with notes about the electronics shipments we regularly hauled through that pass. Officer Ramirez showed me a map they'd found with dozens of red marks along various mountain roads throughout California and Oregon, each mark dated and annotated with codes they were still trying to decipher. The FBI got involved the next morning, treating it as organized cargo theft across state lines. They interviewed me for 3 hours, going over every detail, every second of what I'd experienced. Turns out similar schemes had been reported in Washington and Idaho, always using the same method. Mannequins designed to cause crashes or emergency stops, always targeting specific types of cargo. They never caught the people responsible, at least not that I ever heard about. The authorities installed more cameras, increased patrols, and put out alerts to all commercial drivers about the mannequin scheme. For weeks afterward, truckers would share stories on the CB about close calls and suspicious figures on mountain roads. I finished my delivery to Elko a day late and had to explain everything to my dispatcher, who'd already heard about it on the news. When I finally got home that weekend, I hugged Amy and Sophia longer than usual, unable to explain why I was so shaken by what should have been just another hazard of the job. I still drive that route sometimes, and yes, I still slow down at Dead Man's Curve. Even in perfect weather. Other drivers do too. You can tell the ones who know the story by how their brake lights flare up before that bend. The worst part is the uncertainty that stays with you. Every time I see something on the side of the road at night, even just a trash bag or a piece of tire, I wonder if it's them starting up again. If tonight's the night another driver won't be as lucky as I was. The company installed dash cameras in all our trucks after my incident, and I keep that footage saved on my phone. 3 yellow figures in the rain that nearly cost me everything. Proof that sometimes the real monsters are just people with a plan. I need everyone here to understand that what happened to me last April still makes me check my mirrors constantly, even when I'm just driving to the grocery store. I was hauling a load of automotive parts from Milwaukee to Kansas City, a route I'd done maybe 50 times before. At 38, I'd been driving trucks for almost 15 years, mostly doing these Midwest runs where you get to know every rest stop, every good diner, every speed trap. My wife Jennifer and our 2 kids were used to me being gone 3-4 days at a stretch, and I always made good money, because I preferred the night drives when traffic was lighter and I could make better time. That particular run started like any other. Loaded up around noon, grabbed dinner at this place that makes incredible meatloaf sandwiches. and hit the road proper around 8 p.m. when the sun was setting behind the cornfields. The first few hours were perfect driving weather. Clear skies, temperature dropping to that comfortable 60 degrees where you don't need the AC but you're not cold either. I had my thermos full of coffee, a bag of those pretzel rods I'm addicted to, and my CB radio crackling with the usual chatter from other drivers. Around midnight, somewhere on I-80 through Iowa, most of the radio traffic had died down to just occasional check-ins about speed traps or weather conditions ahead. I was making great time, probably doing 75 in a 70 zone, when I heard something that made me turn down my music. Through the static came this voice, real clear and calm, saying, "Hey there, Garrett. How's that Freightliner handling tonight?" Now I drive a Freightliner Cascadia. Pretty common rig, but hearing my actual first name instead of my handle Midwest Ghost made me pause. Nobody on the CB uses real names unless they know you personally, and this voice didn't sound familiar at all. I grabbed my mic and responded with, "This is Midwest Ghost, who's asking?" But got nothing back except dead air. Figured maybe it was someone from the company messing around, though that didn't explain how they'd know exactly where I was at that moment. About 10 minutes later, just as I was passing mile marker 142, the voice came back. "Mile marker 142, right on schedule, Garrett. That load of alternators and brake assemblies must be keeping you steady." My chest tightened because that was exactly what I was hauling, down to the specific parts, and that information wasn't on any public manifest. The shipping details were electronic, sealed, only accessible to the warehouse crews at both ends and our dispatch office. I tried to think if maybe someone at the loading dock had been extra chatty, but I couldn't recall talking to anyone beyond the usual paperwork signatures. The rational part of my brain kept saying there had to be an explanation. Maybe dispatch was playing some stupid late-night prank, or another driver from my company was having fun at my expense. But then the voice came through again, and this time it said something that made me grip the steering wheel harder. "Jennifer's probably asleep by now, tucked in that blue comforter you bought her for Christmas. Your boy Mason's got that baseball game on Saturday you're gonna miss." I nearly swerved into the rumble strips. How could anyone know about my son's little league schedule, or what color our bedroom comforter was? These weren't things I talked about on the radio, ever. My personal life stayed personal, and I used the CB strictly for traffic and weather. Maybe the occasional joke with drivers I'd known for years. I switched off my CB completely, something I never do because it's like driving blind without traffic updates from other truckers. The silence in the cab felt wrong, but not as wrong as that voice knowing things about my family. My phone was mounted on the dashboard and I thought about calling Jennifer, but what would I say? "Hey, honey, some creep on the radio knows about our comforter?" She'd think I'd been driving too long, needed to pull over and sleep. The weird thing was, I wasn't tired at all. Adrenaline had me wide awake now, checking every single vehicle that passed me, studying them in my side mirrors as they disappeared into the darkness ahead. About 20 miles down the road, I couldn't stand the silence anymore and flipped the CB back on, switching to channel 19, the main trucker channel, hoping to hear normal chatter that would calm my nerves. Instead, the very second I turned it on, that same voice was already there like it had been waiting. "Channel 19, Channel 9, Channel 28. Doesn't matter where you go, Garrett. I've been listening to you for weeks now. That story you told about finding that injured dog near Waterloo. Really touching. The way you complain about the coffee at that Flying J near Davenport? Hilarious." My mouth went completely dry. Those were conversations from different trips, different times of day, scattered across the last month. Someone had been monitoring me, recording maybe, building up this whole profile of my life through casual CB conversations. The voice continued, almost conversational now. "You're wondering how, aren't you? It's actually pretty simple when you know what you're doing. Your CB registration, your DOT number, cross-reference that with some shipping databases. Social media is gold for family details. Jennifer really should make her Facebook more private." That's when I noticed the headlights in my mirrors, maybe a quarter mile back, maintaining perfect distance. Cars had been passing me all night, but this one just sat there, matching my speed exactly. When I nudged the accelerator up to 80, those headlights stayed put. When I eased back down to 70, same thing. The voice on the CB came through again. "That's right, we're right behind you. Wanted to make sure you knew you weren't alone out here." The headlights suddenly flashed 3 times. Long, short, long, and then went back to normal. My mind was racing through options. Call 911, take the next exit, pull into a rest stop where there'd be other people. But truckers know that calling cops about someone following you on the interstate rarely gets immediate response, especially when you can't prove any actual crime. And stopping seemed like exactly what this person wanted me to do. The next 40 miles were the longest of my entire driving career. That car stayed behind me like it was attached by an invisible rope, never varying its distance by more than a few yards. The CB voice would pipe up every few minutes with these observations. "Nice lane change, very smooth. Oh, you're running low on fuel, probably need to stop in the next 50 miles or so. There's that Love station at exit 88, but the pilot at exit 95 has better diesel prices, doesn't it?" And the worst part was, everything they said was accurate. My fuel gauge was sitting just above a quarter tank, and I did usually prefer that pilot station. They'd done their homework, probably tracked my fuel card purchases, knew my patterns better than I'd realized I even had patterns. The headlights would flash in these weird sequences, sometimes quick bursts, sometimes long holds, like some kind of code I couldn't understand. I decided to test something. There was a way station coming up at mile marker 201 that I knew would be closed this time of night, but it had good lighting and security cameras. I put on my turn signal way early, watching those headlights behind me. Sure enough, they mimicked my signal, clicking on at the exact same moment. But as I started to merge into the exit lane, the CB crackled. "Nice try, Garrett, but we both know that station's been closed since midnight. Cameras don't even record anymore. Budget cuts last January. Keep driving." I jerked the wheel back into my lane, heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine noise. They knew about the cameras being shut off. That wasn't public information. I'd only known because a state trooper mentioned it during a random inspection last month. This person had done serious research, or worse, they had connections to people who would know these things. My phone started buzzing with texts, and at first I thought maybe Jennifer had woken up. But when I glanced at the screen, the messages were from an unknown number. Just coordinates, latitude and longitude numbers, one after another. I recognized the format from my GPS training, and when I mentally calculated the first set, I realized it was marking my exact position on the highway at that moment. The second set was about 5 miles ahead. The third, 10 miles. They were plotting my route, showing me they knew exactly where I was going. The voice on the CB had gone quiet, but somehow that was worse than the talking. All I had now was the steady hum of those headlights in my mirror, and the occasional buzz of another coordinate text. My fuel gauge kept dropping, and I knew I'd have to stop soon whether I wanted to or not. The pilot station sign glowed in the distance, and I had maybe 15 miles worth of diesel left, 20 if I pushed it. My mind was working through scenarios: pull in fast, fuel up with the engine running, ready to bolt. But truckers know you can't just tear out of a fuel station with a big rig. It takes time to maneuver, time to build speed. The headlights behind me started flashing again, rapidly this time, almost celebratory, like they knew decision time was coming. Then the CB voice returned, but different now, excited. "Exit 95 coming up, Garrett. Pump number 7 is your favorite, isn't it? Far end, good turning radius for that Freightliner. We'll be right there with you." I realized then that they'd been pushing me toward this moment all along, wearing me down psychologically, making me paranoid and exhausted so I'd be off my game when I finally had to stop. But I noticed something they might not have counted on. A Walmart distribution center rig had been slowly gaining on us for the last 10 miles, and there were 2 more trucks visible in the distance behind him. Instead of taking exit 95, I grabbed my phone and called my dispatcher on speaker, loud enough that it might pick up on the CB if they were somehow monitoring my cab. "Hey, Brad. Yeah, I'm at mile 290, running low on fuel, going to stop at the pilot exit 95, But I've got a vehicle that's been pacing me for about 60 miles, acting suspicious. White sedan, can't make out the plates. I'm documenting everything for insurance and duty. Brad's gravelly voice filled the cab, concerned and alert. You need me to call State Patrol? I watched those headlights suddenly fall back, dropping speed rapidly. Stand by, Brad, I said, keeping my voice steady. Vehicle is now decreasing speed, falling back. But yeah, give State Patrol a heads up, I'm pulling into the pilot in about 2 minutes. The CB stayed silent. The headlights kept falling back until they were just distant dots, then suddenly took an exit before the pilot, disappearing into the darkness of some side road. I pulled into the pilot with my whole body tense, scanning every vehicle in the lot, every shadow between the parked trucks. Brad had called back saying State Patrol would swing by within 20 minutes, and 2 other drivers from my company were about 30 miles behind me if I needed backup. I fueled up at pump 5, not 7, with my doors locked and engine running, against all safety protocols, but I didn't care. The whole time I kept watching for that white sedan, for anyone approaching my rig, for any face that seemed too interested in what I was doing. The other truckers around me were just doing their normal routines, checking tires, grabbing coffee, stretching their legs, completely unaware that I'd just spent the last 2 hours being stalked by someone who knew more about my life than some of my relatives do. When the state trooper showed up, a young guy named Officer Pearson, I showed him the GPS coordinates texts, told him about the CB conversations, described the car's behavior. He took it all seriously, said they'd had similar reports recently, possibly someone targeting truckers for cargo theft or worse. I finished my run to Kansas City, but I was checking mirrors the whole way, jumping every time someone called out on the CB. Filed reports with my company, the DOT, even the FBI's Highway Serial Crimes Division. Yeah, that's a real thing. They never found the white sedan or figured out who was behind it. Changed my route schedule, got a new CB handle, made Jennifer lock down all our social media. The investigators said it was probably someone with insider knowledge of the trucking industry, possibly working with crime rings that target specific high-value loads. These days I run team drives mostly, never alone on those night runs anymore. But sometimes I still hear about other drivers experiencing the same thing. Someone who knows too much, coordinates that predict their route, headlights that follow just a little too perfectly. The truth is, every time I pass exit 95 on I-80, even in broad daylight with my co-driver snoring in the sleeper berth, I still get that tight feeling in my chest, still check my mirrors a little more carefully, still wonder if those headlights behind me are just another trucker trying to make their delivery on time, or if it's happening all over again. February of 2023 was brutal for truckers in the Midwest, and I'd been hauling refrigerated goods for about 6 years by then. Most people think long-haul trucking is just endless highway and bad coffee, but after you've logged enough miles, you develop a sixth sense for when things aren't right. I was running a load of frozen seafood from Boston to San Francisco, pushing through Nebraska on I-80 when the weather turned nasty. The forecast had called for light snow, but what rolled in that night was a full-blown whiteout that had me gripping the wheel hard enough to leave marks. I'd already passed Grand Island when visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet, and the smart move would have been to pull off at the next rest stop. But the load was time-sensitive, and dispatch was breathing down my neck about delivery windows. Plus, I'd driven through worse storms before, or at least that's what I kept telling myself as the wind started pushing my trailer sideways. Around 2 a.m., somewhere between Kearney and North Platte, I noticed headlights in my mirrors, 4 sets, maybe 5, maintaining a tight formation behind me. At first, I figured it was just other drivers using my taillights as a guide through the storm, which happens all the time in bad weather. But something about their spacing was too perfect, too synchronized. They weren't riding my bumper exactly, but they were close enough that I could make out the outline of their rigs through the snow whenever the wind let up for a second. What really got my attention was how dark they were running. No marker lights, no company logos lit up, nothing but their headlights cutting through the storm. I tried reaching out on Channel 19, the standard trucker frequency, asking if anyone needed help or wanted to form a proper convoy to get through the weather safely. Dead silence. Not even static, just nothing, like my CB had suddenly stopped working. I switched through several channels, even tried the emergency frequency but got the same result. Complete radio silence from the trucks behind me. The weird thing was, I could still pick up chatter from other drivers ahead of me, complaining about the conditions and warning about black ice near the next exit. So my radio was working fine, which meant these guys behind me were deliberately staying quiet. I tried speeding up gradually, pushing from 45 to about 55, which was already risky given the conditions. They matched my speed perfectly, maintaining that same eerie formation. When I eased off the throttle, they slowed down too, keeping that exact distance like they were attached to my rig by invisible cables. My fuel gauge was sitting at about a quarter tank, and I knew I'd need to stop soon at the Flying J about 40 miles ahead. But the thought of pulling off with these silent shadows behind me made my chest tight. The snow was coming down harder now, and I could barely see the road markers that usually guide you through these plains. That's when I noticed something else that made my gut twist. The trucks behind me were all identical. Same model, same color from what I could tell. Probably Freightliner Cascadius in that generic white that rental companies use. No company names visible on the doors. No DOT numbers that I could make out, nothing identifying at all. I'd been driving long enough to know that even independent owner-operators usually have some kind of marking on their trucks. These were ghosts, plain and simple, and they were hunting in a pack. I reached for my phone to call my dispatcher, maybe get some advice or at least let someone know what was happening, but I had no signal. Not unusual out here in the middle of nowhere, especially during a storm, but the timing felt too convenient. Then they started getting creative with their positioning. Two of them pulled up alongside me, one on each side, while the others stayed behind. They were boxing me in, a classic aggressive driving move that usually means someone wants you to pull over. But out here, in the middle of a blizzard at 2:30 in the morning, with no legitimate reason for anyone to want me to stop, every alarm bell in my head was going off. I knew about the stories every trucker does. Cargo theft rings that operate on isolated stretches of highway, using multiple vehicles to force drivers off the road. They go after high-value loads, electronics mostly, but seafood can fetch good money too if you know where to fence it. The trucks beside me were matching my speed exactly, close enough that I could see the drivers were wearing baseball caps pulled low. No faces visible in the darkness of their cabs. They weren't trying to pass, weren't falling back, just maintaining that threatening presence. I made a decision that probably saved my cargo and maybe more than that. Instead of trying to outrun them or pulling over like they wanted, I started gradually reducing speed, down to about 35 mph. The truck on my left had to choose between slowing down to or passing me, and after a tense few seconds, he accelerated and moved ahead. That's when I yanked the wheel hard to the left and dove into the median crossover meant for emergency vehicles, the kind they use to turn around when they need to head back the other direction. My trailer fishtailed something awful in the snow, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought I was going to jackknife. But years of winter driving kicked in, and I managed to keep it together, bouncing through the rough terrain of the median. The convoy couldn't follow immediately. Those crossovers are barely wide enough for one truck, and they'd been caught off guard by my sudden move. Now I was heading eastbound on the westbound lanes, technically going the wrong way, but with virtually no traffic due to the storm. I could see their headlights in my mirrors starting to swing around, probably taking the next official exit to double back. But I'd bought myself some time. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine noise, and I knew I had maybe 5 minutes before they'd reorganize and come after me. I pushed through about 2 miles going the wrong direction, hazard lights flashing, praying I wouldn't meet anyone coming through the storm, then took another emergency crossover to get back on the eastbound side. The whole maneuver had put maybe 3 miles between me and them, but in a semi loaded with 40,000 pounds of frozen seafood, that wasn't much of a head start. I grabbed my phone again, Finally had one bar of signal and managed to get through to 911. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first. Truckers getting paranoid in storms isn't uncommon. But when I gave her the mile marker and described 5 identical unmarked trucks running in formation with no lights, her tone changed. She told me there'd been 3 reported hijackings in the last 2 months using the exact same method, always during bad weather when visibility was low and traffic was light. The State Patrol was already looking for this crew, but they kept hitting different stretches of I-80, never the same spot twice. She dispatched units immediately, but warned me they were at least 20 minutes out due to the weather. 20 minutes feels like a lifetime when you're being hunted. I kept checking my mirrors obsessively, waiting for those headlights to reappear, knowing they were probably closing the gap. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later I spotted them again, coming up fast. But this time I wasn't alone on the road. A Schneider truck had appeared ahead of me, and a swift driver was coming up behind. Both legitimate truckers I could hear chatting on the CB about the weather. I immediately got on the radio, breaking into their conversation with a warning about the convoy. The Schneider driver, an older guy named Bill from his voice, said he'd noticed them too, lurking at the last rest area with their engines running but no drivers visible in the cabs. The swift driver chimed in that he'd heard from another trucker about weird activity around this stretch lately. We decided to stick together, forming our own defensive convoy with me in the middle. The Phantom trucks fell back when they saw we'd grouped up, probably realizing their intimidation tactic wouldn't work against 3 of us. But they didn't disappear. They maintained a distance of about a quarter mile, just far enough to be legal, but close enough to keep pressure on. Bill suggested we all take the next exit together, stick close through the off-ramp, and find somewhere public to wait for the State Patrol. The exit was for some small farm town, Elm Creek, I think, and there was a 24-hour gas station visible from the highway. As we signaled for the exit, the Phantom convoy suddenly accelerated, and for a terrifying moment, I thought they were going to ram us. Instead, they blew past at probably 70 mph, dangerous as hell in those conditions, and continued west on I-80. We still took the exit, pulled into that gas station, and parked our rigs side by side under the bright canopy lights. The place had security cameras everywhere, and the night clerk, a young kid who looked fresh out of high school, came out to see why 3 semis had suddenly crowded his lot. The State Patrol showed up about 15 minutes later, took our statements, and said they'd put out an alert for 5 white Freightliner Cascadias running together. The officer, a veteran trooper with gray at his temples, told us we'd done everything right. He'd seen what happens when drivers try to tough it out alone against these crews. Damaged trucks, stolen cargo, and sometimes worse. We stayed at that gas station for about 2 hours, waiting for the weather to improve and drinking terrible coffee while swapping stories. Bill mentioned he'd been driving for 30 years and had never seen anything quite like this. The coordination, the patience, the way they used the storm as cover. The Swift driver, a younger guy who went by Tony, kept checking the parking lot nervously, convinced they might circle back. The trooper stayed with us for a while, making calls to other units, trying to track where the convoy had gone. Around 5 a.m. he got word that they'd been spotted taking an exit about 60 miles west, disappearing into an industrial area where they probably had a warehouse or someplace to strip stolen goods. By then, the snow had let up enough that we felt safe getting back on the road. Bill and Tony decided to convoy with me all the way to North Platte, where I needed to fuel up. We exchanged numbers, promised to keep in touch, and I made it to San Francisco 2 days later without any more incidents. The company never found those trucks or the crew running them, at least not that I heard about. But word spread quickly through the trucker network. CB chatter, truck stop conversations, online forums where drivers share warnings. Everyone started being more careful during storms on that stretch of I-80, especially anyone hauling valuable cargo. I changed my route after that, taking I-70 through Kansas even though it adds miles, and I never drive alone through Nebraska anymore during bad weather. Some might call me paranoid, but they didn't see those 5 sets of headlights maintaining perfect formation in a blizzard, didn't feel that calculated menace of being hunted on an empty highway. I still haul freight, still love the freedom of the open road, but now I know there are predators out there using our own tactics against us. The Phantom Convoy taught me that sometimes the most dangerous things on the highway aren't the ice or the wind or the mechanical failures we all worry about. Sometimes it's the other drivers who see you not as a fellow trucker trying to make a living, but as prey. I've been driving trucks for about 15 years now, mostly hauling refrigerated goods up and down the East Coast. The pay's decent, and I actually enjoy the solitude most nights. Just me and the radio and miles of asphalt stretching ahead. It was a Wednesday in March when everything went sideways. Literally. I was hauling frozen seafood from a distributor in Maryland heading down to Georgia, running a bit behind schedule because of some loading dock delays earlier that morning. My wife Lisa had called me around dinner time, reminding me about our daughter's soccer game that weekend, and I promised I'd make it back in time. I remember hanging up and thinking how lucky I was to have such a normal, peaceful life compared to some of the guys I knew who'd been through divorces or worse. The stretch of road I was on that night was one of those forgotten highways that GPS rarely suggests anymore, but old-timers like me still use to shave off time. Route 301 through rural Virginia, if you know it. Nothing but pine trees and the occasional deer for company. Around 11 p.m., maybe closer to midnight, I came around a bend and saw something that made me ease off the accelerator immediately. About a quarter mile ahead there was a sedan. Looked like a Camry or maybe an Accord, hard to tell in the dark, parked completely sideways across both lanes, hazard lights blinking that rhythmic amber warning. My first thought was accident. Maybe someone had spun out or blown a tire. You see enough weird stuff on the road at night, and usually it's just someone who needs help. But something about the positioning seemed too perfect, too deliberate, like someone had carefully maneuvered that car to block as much of the road as possible. I downshifted and started slowing the rig. 18 wheels don't exactly stop on a dime when you're loaded with 30,000 pounds of frozen shrimp and crab. The shoulder on both sides was basically non-existent here, just drainage ditches and thick pine forest pressing right up against the asphalt. As I got closer, maybe 100 yards out now, I flicked on my high beams to get a better look at the situation. The car's interior light was on, driver's door hanging open, but I couldn't see anyone inside or around the vehicle. That detail stuck with me, the dome light casting this pale glow onto the empty driver's seat, like someone had just stepped out seconds ago. I reached for my CB radio thinking maybe I should call out to see if any other truckers were nearby, but static filled the channel. Not unusual for this stretch, but the timing made the hair on my neck prickle. By now I was down to about 20 miles per hour. Close enough to see the car was a silver Toyota, relatively new, no visible damage that would explain why it was blocking the road. That's when movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. At first I thought it was just shadows from my headlights sweeping across the tree line, but then I saw them clearly. 3 figures stepping out from the woods on my right side, moving with purpose toward my truck. They were wearing these cheap plastic masks, the kind you'd buy at a dollar store for Halloween. Except these were all the same. Blank white faces with cutout eyes and mouths. The way they moved wasn't panicked or desperate like someone needing help would move. It was coordinated, calculated, like they'd done this before. 2 more emerged from the left side, and I realized with absolute clarity that this wasn't an accident scene at all. My foot found the accelerator before my brain fully processed what to do. Years of driving had taught me that sometimes your instincts know better than your conscious mind, and right then, every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. The engine roared as I shifted up, diesel smoke probably billowing black behind me. The masked figures started running toward the truck, and I saw one of them holding something in his hand. Might have been a crowbar, might have been something worse. The gap between my truck and the sideways Toyota was narrowing fast, and I had maybe 2 seconds to decide whether to try squeezing through the narrow space between the car's front bumper and the ditch, or just ram straight through. The guy closest to my driver's side was reaching for the door handle, and I could hear him shouting something to the others. his voice muffled by the mask but urgent, angry that I wasn't stopping like they'd planned. I aimed for the Toyota's rear end and floored it. The impact wasn't as bad as I expected. The car spun away like a toy, metal screeching and glass exploding as my truck's massive front end connected. The momentum carried the sedan into the right side ditch with a horrible crunching sound. In my side mirror, illuminated by my taillights, I saw two of the masked men diving out of the way, one of them tumbling into the drainage ditch. But what really made my chest tighten was seeing more figures emerging from the woods further back, maybe 7 or 8 total, all wearing those same white masks. They'd been wading deeper in the trees, probably expecting me to stop completely, and then surrounding the cab. One of them threw something at my truck. Heard it clang off the trailer. I kept the pedal down, watching the speedometer climb past 60, 70, my whole rig shaking from the impact damage but still running strong. For the next 5 miles, I didn't slow down once, constantly checking my mirrors for headlights. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the engine noise. The adrenaline was making everything hyper clear. Every shadow on the road looked like another ambush. Every glint of light in the trees seemed like eyes watching. I tried the CB radio again, and this time got through to another trucker about 10 miles ahead. Told him to watch out for a group trying to block the road, and he said he'd already heard chatter about something going down on 301. Apparently, I wasn't the first one they'd tried this on tonight. Another driver, guy hauling paper products, had reported a similar setup about an hour earlier, 20 miles north. He'd managed to reverse out before they closed in, took some back roads to get around. The trucker on the radio said state police were supposedly on their way, but out here in the middle of nowhere, that could mean 30-40 minutes. I pulled into a well-lit gas station about 15 miles from where it happened. One of those big travel stops with multiple cameras and plenty of people around. My legs were shaking when I climbed down from the cab to inspect the damage. The front bumper was dented and scraped. Paint from the Toyota streaked across it like silver scars. There was a deep gouge along the passenger side, where something had scraped the length of the trailer, probably when I'd clipped the car. While I was looking at it, another trucker walked over, older guy with a gray beard and a Vietnam vet cap. He took one look at the damage and asked if I'd run into them too. Turns out he'd heard about 3 similar attempts in the past month, always on quiet stretches of secondary highways. Always the same setup with the car blocking the road and masked men waiting in the woods. He said they were targeting refrigerated trucks specifically, probably looking for high-value loads they could move quickly. The police showed up at the gas station about 45 minutes later, 2 state troopers who looked tired but took my statement seriously. They had me walk them through everything. The position of the car, how many masked men I saw, what they were wearing, the timing of it all. One of the troopers, younger guy with a military-style haircut, told me they'd found the Toyota abandoned about 2 miles from where I'd hit it, stripped of its plates and VIN numbers filed off. No sign of the masked men, but they'd found tire tracks from at least 3 other vehicles hidden in an old logging road nearby. The older trooper mentioned they suspected it was an organized crew, possibly the same group that had been hitting truckers across 3 states. They'd gotten bold lately, escalating from simple theft attempts at truck stops to these elaborate highway ambushes. What really got to me was when he said I was lucky. Another driver in Georgia hadn't been as fortunate the previous week, ended up in the hospital with a cracked skull when they dragged him from his cab. I called Lisa from the gas station parking lot. Didn't tell her everything, just said I'd had a close call with some bad weather and was running late. No point in making her worry about something that was already over. But I couldn't stop thinking about those masks, the way they all looked identical, like they'd bought them in bulk. There was something especially unnerving about the coordination of it all. The perfectly positioned car, the staged interior light, the groups hidden at different depths in the forest. These weren't desperate people making impulsive decisions. This was planned, rehearsed, professional. The older trucker, Eddie was his name, stayed with me until I was ready to get back on the road. He gave me his number, said there was an informal network of drivers keeping each other updated about dangerous stretches and suspicious activity. Said the companies wouldn't do anything about it until someone important got hurt, so we had to look out for each other. I finished that run to Georgia, but I took the interstate the whole way, even though it added 3 hours to my trip. Every time I saw a car on the shoulder with its hazards on, my grip tightened on the wheel. Made it to the delivery on time somehow, unloaded the seafood, and started my route back home. The company never said much about the damage to the truck, just had me fill out an incident report and told me to be more careful. But Eddie's network turned out to be real. I started getting text messages from other drivers, warnings about suspicious vehicles, alternate route suggestions, even photos of cars that had been spotted multiple times near ambush sites. 2 weeks after my encounter, they caught part of the crew. 5 men arrested during an attempted hijacking in North Carolina, found with those same white masks in their van along with crowbars, zip ties, and a signal jammer that explained why the CB radio had gone to static. They were part of a larger ring targeting refrigerated trucks carrying pharmaceuticals, seafood, and electronics, anything that could be moved quickly on the black market. I still drive that stretch of 301 sometimes, when the schedule demands it, but now I do it during daylight hours whenever possible, and I always slow down at that particular bend, even though the road is clear. There's a small scar in the asphalt where I clipped the Toyota, or maybe I'm just imagining it. Either way, it serves as a reminder. I made it home from my daughter's soccer game that weekend, watched her score 2 goals, and held Lisa's hand a little tighter than usual. Never told her the full story, but I did install a better dash cam system and started carrying a legal backup defense tool in the cab. The truth is, those men in masks are still out there. Not that specific crew maybe, but others just like them. Eddie texts me sometimes with updates and the network keeps growing. We share information, watch each other's backs, and always trust our instincts when something doesn't look right. Because out there on those lonely highways at night, sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster is your willingness to keep driving, no matter what's blocking your path. I had been driving long-haul routes for a few years, mostly carrying refrigerated loads across different states. At that point in my life, I was spending more time behind the wheel than anywhere else, but I didn't really mind. The steady hum of the engine and the endless stretches of road gave me a rhythm I could live with. That night, I was hauling produce, heading east after finishing a late drop-off. I remember it was a quiet night. Barely any traffic, just the occasional glow of a farmhouse light far in the distance. I had the radio on low, sipping coffee that was already going lukewarm, thinking about how many more hours I'd put in before stopping at a rest area. Around midnight, the sky was heavy with clouds, blotting out the stars, and the road stretched like a black ribbon with no end. That's when I noticed a set of lights in my mirror, red and blue, flashing faintly at first, then growing brighter. My first thought was routine. Maybe I'd missed a taillight going out, or they were doing random checks. I eased off the gas, keeping my truck steady, and pulled onto the shoulder. The road was so deserted that the only sound was the hiss of my brakes and the gravel crunching under the tires as I stopped. When I glanced in the mirror again, the vehicle behind me struck me as odd. It wasn't a cruiser, just a dark sedan with one of those dash-mounted light bars stuck up against the windshield. No decals, no markings, nothing. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out wearing dark clothing. He had a cap pulled low and a bulky jacket zipped to the chin. No reflective vest, no badge catching the light. Nothing I'd expect from a trooper pulling someone over on a rural highway. My pulse quickened, and I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. He walked right up to my door without hesitation, moving with a sort of casual confidence like he'd done this 100 times. When he reached the cab, he tilted his head and rapped on the door with his knuckles. His voice came muffled through the glass. "Step out of the vehicle." It wasn't a request, it was firm, almost rehearsed. That was the moment something in me shifted. Every instinct told me this wasn't right. Real officers usually start by asking for paperwork, explaining the stop. This man gave nothing, just a command that didn't feel safe. I kept my foot close to the pedal, trying not to let him see the tension building in my face. I leaned slightly, pretending to reach for something in the passenger seat while sneaking another glance at him. His jacket looked oversized, like it was meant to conceal more than just his frame. The way he positioned himself close to the cab, shoulders squared, made it clear he wanted to control the interaction. He repeated the same words, a little sharper this time. "Step out of the truck now." My mouth went dry. Every warning I'd ever heard about imposters on the road came rushing back all at once. Instead of rolling the window down, I spoke through the glass. I asked him to show me his badge or some identification. His reaction was immediate. Irritation flickered across his face. He shifted his weight and pressed one hand against the side of my door, leaning in closer, almost trying to peer inside. "Don't make this difficult," he muttered, his tone dropping into something harder, more threatening. My gut told me loud and clear, if I opened that door, I wasn't walking away from this safely. I flicked my eyes toward the mirror, checking the road behind us. Still no traffic, no backup lights approaching. Just the two of us stranded in that pool of my taillights and his fake siren glow. I thumbed the lock button again just to hear the reassuring click, my other hand already sliding the gear into place. He must have noticed because his voice rose, sharper now, cutting through the night. "Open the door. Now." He wasn't trying to sound like a cop anymore. It came out like a demand, almost desperate. That was the breaking point for me. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the roar of the engine tearing through the silence as the truck lurched forward. Gravel shot out from under my tires, and in the mirror I caught a glimpse of him stumbling back, his outline shrinking in the red glow. The sedan's lights swerved as he scrambled toward it, but I was already pushing the rig back onto the highway. My heart pounded in my ears as I focused on nothing but speed, the white lines blurring into streaks under the beams of my headlights. I kept driving, barely daring to check my mirrors, half expecting those flashing lights to reappear at any second. The road felt endless, every mile stretching longer than the last. My grip on the wheel was tight, my eyes scanning for any sign of life, another truck, a gas station, anything. It took a good 10 minutes before I spotted headlights coming from the opposite direction, and only then did the knot in my chest loosen slightly. Whoever that man was, he hadn't caught up. When I finally reached a truck stop about 30 miles down, I pulled in and parked under the brightest set of floodlights I could find. The lot was dotted with rigs, and just seeing other drivers moving around gave me a rush of relief. I went inside, grabbed a coffee, and tried to steady myself. The clerk behind the counter asked if I was all right because, apparently, I looked pale as hell. I told him what had just happened, and his expression darkened instantly. He said he'd heard of similar stories, people pretending to be cops on isolated highways, targeting drivers when they were most vulnerable. I called the state police from the payphone in the corner, not wanting to take any chances with my cell signal cutting out. They asked for every detail, the car, the man, the stretch of road. The officer on the line didn't sound surprised. He just told me I'd done the right thing by not stepping out, and that they'd send a patrol to sweep the area. That answer stuck with me because it meant they knew this wasn't the first time. To this day, I still replay that moment when he stood outside my cab, insisting I get out. If I had opened that door, I don't know what would have happened, and honestly, I don't want to know. All I can say is that after that night, I never trusted flashing lights on a lonely road without double-checking. I still drive, but I keep my doors locked, my instincts sharp, and my eyes wide open. Maybe I was lucky, maybe stubborn, but I got away, and that's the only reason I'm here to share this with you now.